As I said, good evening everybody, welcome to TNSradio.com. I'm your host Vincent of the ancient Clan O'Brien on the land known as Ireland. It's 9:02pm, we're live, it's the 18th of the 7th, 2010 AD, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined tonight by Mike Montagne. Mike is basically the creator, developer, engineer of the perfected economy, theperfecteconomy.com, or the mathematically perfected economy. Folks, if you're tuned in now, if you have some form of recording device, please record this show, because I think it will be essential for you to spread it, record it on your mobile phone so you can play it to people elsewhere. If not, the file will be available for download on tnsradio.com as soon as I can make that available, or hopefully I'll have that done either by 2 a.m. tonight or early tomorrow morning. So without further ado, Mike, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. Good evening.
Hello, Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Now I have you. Yes, I can hear you now. Well, thank you very much for doing the show. And is there anything else you'd like to tell people about yourself first before we crack on?
Well, it's an honor to be on your show, to challenge before the public ear all prior monetary thinking, so-called at least. I've been... Actually, mathematically perfected economy goes back a long way. I've actually advocated mathematically perfected economy for something like 40 years now, and it's really a simple matter, more simple than most people would assume. There's people out there who think that who could ever perfect economy. And yet, of course, they haven't given any quality thought to the issues. A patent response to that assertion, for instance, is someone might say a Ron Paul supporter or a member of his office actually once said this to me. He says, everyone knows there's no such thing as mathematically perfected economy, which, if you think about it, is such a preposterous statement on so many levels, because after all, if you're running for president and your actually primary thought is that there's no solution, well, how have you developed what you have, and what are you actually advocating then, or what are you even going to say that it is? But my patent response, I asked him, I said, do you mean to tell me then if inflation and deflation are defined respectively as increases or decreases in circulation per represented wealth, that there's no solution whatever for inflation and deflation? And I imagine he didn't anticipate the question, but he paused for quite a long while. He was unable to answer. He finally says, well, I can't debate that with you, sir. Well, it's elementary fundamental math. I've done this even with kindergartners, but a second grader can usually get this problem right. And that is, so if you define inflation as an increase in circulation per goods and services or represented wealth, or however you define it, per anything, and deflation conversely is a decrease in circulation per anything, obviously there is one and one only solution for inflation and deflation, and that is to maintain a circulation which is equal to whatever you're defining it to be equal to. So, to represent, that is. So, mathematically perfected economy actually has two things that we really need to perceive about it. First of all, to really put it into perspective, and that is it's really a three-part thesis, but there's two important parts to get. And the first is it's a mathematic proof that any so-called economy based on interest-bearing debt ultimately terminates itself under insoluble debt. That is, if this theory is true, and there's a mathematic proof that I published of this in 1979, and of course I'd spoken about it for 10 years prior to that, but and the mathematic community would never even dream of disputing this. It's so cut and dry. But so-called economists have challenged it on a number of levels, and I've maintained disproofs of their attempted invalidations, since, well, even 10 years before there was an official internet. But in any case, what this theory of inevitable failure means is that economies don't really fluctuate. They may do relatively better or relatively worse through a period of time, over which yet they actually suffer inherent, irreversible multiplication of artificial indebtedness in proportion to capacity to pay. That is, if they do a little bit better for a period of time, that period of time is temporary, and the ability to do better is eroded away by this multiplication of artificial indebtedness in proportion to capacity to service debt. So this is a first part of a multifaceted thesis, actually, which indicates that we have a problem that we absolutely have to solve, or we will suffer terminal failure. In other words, the Federal Reserve System was created here in the United States against public mandate. The 1912 Democrat Party platform promised not to create a central bank, and the Republicans had advocated creation of a central bank through their Aldrich bill. So the Democrats, recruit Wilson and make him a presidential candidate. I think he was a history teacher, and not a very good one. But he's elected to power and he's not even aware of the party platform, and within a very short span of time, the very authors of the Aldrich bill are in his administration authoring this Federal Reserve Act. They name it differently, so it's as if it's a different thing, but they use the text right out of the Aldrich bill, adopted in some places and others and whatnot, but it's basically the same thing, and betrayed the people. 15 years later, we suffer the world's first Great Depression. Now, it's to the interest of these people because they had a purpose in doing this. It's to their interest that we never understand the nature of the problem. And that is, so people today believe mistakenly that the first Great Depression was caused by the securities market crash. Well, many years ago, actually 10 years before there was an internet with all these other documents that I produced for the Reagan administration, I put those on what were early pre-internet bulletin boards in academia, certain universities and whatnot. And one of my papers was mathematic proof that the Federal Reserve caused the first Great Depression. And this paper outlines how, in fact, the securities market crash was inevitable because of this same fundamental cause that I'm pointing out in this first part of this thesis. That is, inherent multiplication of artificial indebtedness in proportion to capacity to pay. And what happened largely was that the Federal Reserve was loaning money to speculate on the stock market on short-term promissory notes. So on a 15-day or 24-hour broker call loan or 10-day promissory note, and there were 20-day and 30-day, whatever. A person might put up, say, they had $100 in savings. So they might invest that in the securities market, and you could buy securities on a margin. So that meant that with 10% margin, you'd have 10% of the money and borrow 90% to buy the securities. So you might buy $1,000 worth of securities on $100 of your own money on a 15-day promissory note, for instance. And so in just over 2 weeks, you were obligated to pay this debt off, plus some interest and broker fees and whatnot. And basically what would happen is within that 2 weeks, you'd see the price of this security, so-called security, go up. such that maybe you sold your $1,000 worth of whatever for $1,100, basically making $100 profit less a minuscule amount of interest over that short period of time, and a small broker fee of some kind. Let's just say you cleared $100. Say you sold it for $1,150, and $50 covered the interest and the broker fee. So what in effect happened is in 2 weeks, you doubled your money. You doubled your $100 savings into $200. Well, of course, what this meant then is this artificial inflation of the value of so-called securities sustained by this limitless creation of money, so-called money. And there's different definitions of money, and when we discuss these things, people need to differentiate with them, and we'll have to get around to the different definitions of money and what each mean for people to really grasp what our message is here, what we're trying to help people to understand. And it's important that the entire world understands this now, because we are faced with the terminal, stages of this system. In other words, while I promoted this thesis of inherent failure, the second major part of it is that there is one and one only solution for the categoric faults of these systems, and that being mathematically perfected economy means that we need to understand the differences between this pretended economy and mathematically perfected economy, so that the world can avert this inevitable monetary failure.
Can I cut in there for a second? I just want to let folks know, tonight, folks, this show, if it gets complicated for you, you're going to have to download the podcast and listen again until you understand it, and do some research, because I specifically don't want any of this information dumbed down, if you will. It's I think it's important to get that across, Mike,
Yeah, I generally don't even bother explaining it that way. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, when I began writing, 40 years ago, I had many authors, actually published authors, who were great fans, not just of my writing, but of more so the message, because in truth, this is well, it's certainly one of the very most important things that we could master in our lifetimes. In fact, I consider it, and not even to be a matter of opinion, that it's an obligatory skill, if you will, to understand economy. And once you do, you're changed forever, because you see how our politics works, how virtually every government of the world is usurped, how it serves only the financial community. And these are not conspiracy theories. These are actual facts of conspiracy. And one thing that we should understand also in regard to conspiracy, I'm not a conspiracy nut. I've pored over the Warren Report. I've actually produced, ballistic proof that, certain assumptions by the Warren Report were invalid. In fact, the exact opposite of what would have happened in regard to the sequence of the shots and so on and so forth. And I'm not a conspiracy nut person, or not even close. And you find not deaf ears, but perceptive ears can, invalidate bogus ideas of, what's wrong with this world. So one thing we have to understand about conspiracy and government, though, is that, in fact, everything that the government does, that any government does, whether it's a good government or a bad government, everything is a conspiracy. And the only question is whether that conspiracy serves you or not. In other words, the founders of the United States, before they signed the Declaration of Independence, they conspired. They conspired against the British monarchy, and there's no doubt about it. They were conspirators, and I would have been among them if I was alive at that time. We need to, across the world, we need to